In this ongoing series, I aim to chart the entire history of one of humankind's most spectacular art forms, animation. In this part, we'll discuss the emergence of stop-motion animation, touching on the revolutionary works of J. Stuart Blackton, Alexandra Shiryaev, Saihundo Deschamons, and Ladislav Starovich. This is the evolution of cartoons. Part 3. The origins of stop-motion. By the early 1900s, the stop trick had become an incredibly common motion picture technique. Pioneered by master illusionist and filmmaker Georges Méliès, the trick utilized stop action to allow on-screen elements to instantly appear, disappear, or transform by being added, removed, or altered between frames. Certainly a primitive live-action visual effect, the technique was also utilized to craft some of the earliest animation recorded on celluloid film. British-American illusionist and emerging filmmaker James Stuart Blackton's 1899 picture, The Enchanted Drawing, shows what is commonly considered the earliest hand-drawn animated images put to film. Dubbed the father of American animation, Blackton would later utilize the stop trick to pioneer stop-motion animation. Blackton's discovery of stop motion came just like that of the trick cut, by accident. In 1905, while filming a complex trick film, Blackton observed a bizarre illusion in which billowing steam in the background appeared as if it were miraculously shooting across the frame. Blackton began experimenting with the effect, which he soon found could not only speed up movement, but could also give movement to inanimate objects, a new form of animation. 1906's humorous phases of funny faces showcased not only hand-drawn images in motion, but also a stick puppet coming to life, perhaps the first example of stop-motion stick puppetry. 1907's The Haunted Hotel sees Blackton using stop-motion to depict spirits invisibly moving objects, as well as bringing life to toy figures. One particularly impressive sequence even sees the house itself coming to life. 1909's The Smoke Fairy, a particularly elaborate trick film, similarly used stop motion to depict inanimate objects being moved by minuscule fairies. In one of the earliest pieces of product placement, the fairies fool around with a man's tobacco products. Meanwhile, in France, Spanish artist Saihundo Deschamons was carving a name for himself as a talented maker of surrealist trick films, and had quickly become a serious competitor of both Méliès and Blackton. Many of the tricks Chamont experimented with had been conceived before. Nonetheless, his films do show early examples of an artist refining and furthering the mechanics of stop-motion animation. 1906's Bob's Electric Theatre showcased an extensive stop-motion sequence featuring complex animation of toy dolls, and is perhaps the earliest surviving film to do so. His 1908 film, Modern Sculpture, showcased a sequence featuring self-moulding clay, and though the movements were minor and limited, this would illustrate an early use of what would eventually be known as claymation. Much of Chamont's work, however, directly riffed on the works of his contemporaries. 1908's The Haunted House was a direct remake of Blackton's Haunted Hotel, with the entire stop-motion segment recreated almost exactly. The Electric Hotel, released that same year, similarly used stop-motion to depict invisible spectres moving around inanimate objects. Of course, lax or non-existent copyright laws allowed such copy-paste work, though Chamont's remakes weren't entirely lazy, but rather elaborate, with the artist throwing in much of his own flair and creative license. Highly influential on the art form, Chamont's films were wildly successful in Europe, and exemplify a growing fascination with the art form across the globe. Other similar examples of stop-motion animation can be seen in the works of various other pioneering figures during this period. Claymation can be seen in the films of the great train robbery director Edwin S. Porter, most notably his lost film A Sculptor's Welsh Rabbit Dream, and in Wallace McCutcheon's The Sculptor's Nightmare, both released in 1908. Stop-motion with toys also became quite prevalent, with one of the most notable being A Dream of Toyland, directed by British film innovator Arthur Melbourne Cooper. Cooper also produced a series of stop-motion films utilising matches to create animate stick figures. These films, in fact, are believed by some scholars to be the first examples of stop-motion animation, with an alleged dating of the late 1890s, though they are more commonly believed to have been produced around 1908. In Russia, another artist was making huge leaps in stop-motion innovation, Alexandra Shiryaev, a ballet master with the St. Petersburg Imperial Ballet. A skilled choreographer with a profound interest in character dance, he opened Russia's first character class at the Imperial Theatrical School, taking the role of head teacher. Shiryaev had an incredible memory, able to visualize scores of ballet choreographies perfectly. As an aide, he began creating small animations to intricately detail the dances he was tasked with. He created more than 20 papier-mâché puppets of nearly 30 centimeters in height, building posable soft wire frames inside. This allowed his puppets to be put in any position, answering to the movements of the human body. Shiryaev would then sketch the positions in sequence onto a long paper strip, employing chronophotographic techniques. Running the strip, effectively a reel, through a projector of his own design, the dancers could be viewed in motion for analysis. On a trip to London in the early 1900s, Shiryaev grew a fascination with the sideshow that had thrown Europe into a frenzy, motion pictures, and purchased his own cine camera with a desire to learn a new craft. Shiryaev created dozens of private family movies and experimental trick films, though soon found a symbiotic ground between his two loves, realizing that film could be a terrific medium to document choreography. Shiryaev began filming simple dances and later approached the Imperial Ballet to film live performances free of charge, but was denied. Instead, he built his own miniature theatre stage in his home studio and began restaging his puppet dancers, this time capturing them frame by frame with his camera. The result? Arguably the very first pieces of stop-motion animation to utilise wireframe puppetry. Between 1906 and 1909, he created at least 7 intricate stop-motion puppet animations showcasing popular ballet choreographies. So ambitious in nature, Shiryaev's longest film ran for almost an entire reel at a whopping 15 minutes. While massively groundbreaking, Shiryaev's pioneering work had no broad influence or impact on the art form. His films were never screened outside of Russia and, in fact, were only ever intended for private viewing, simply educational tools. During Soviet-era Russia, Shiryaev's films were lost and he became largely unknown. His trailblazing works remained hidden for almost 100 years, until their discovery in 1995. It was another Russian filmmaker who would instead gain recognition as the father of true narrative stop-motion animation, Ladislav Starovich. Like others we've profiled, Starovich was a multi-talented artist, excelling in drawing, painting and photography, and was also well-learned, having extensively studied ethnography and entomology. He was not only the director of the Museum of Natural History in Kaunas, Lithuania, but also had a gigantic private collection of insects. In 1909, Starovich began experimenting with filmmaking, recording short documentaries of his insects. In 1910, he was commissioned to produce a short film documenting the life of stag beetles and planned to film an epic battle sequence. Starovich waited days and days, but found his beetles would not fight with the lights shining on them. Many even died under the hot beams. Adamant to capture his fight, Starovich made trick animals by taking dried bug carcasses and replacing their limbs with wire attached by sealing wax. Inspired by Melbourne Cooper's Match films, he began a process of stop-motion animation, utilising the deceased bugs as puppets. His stag beetle film, Lucana Service, would become the first widely released animated puppet film, and Russia's first official animation. Starovich enjoyed the process so much that he took filmmaking up as a profession, continuing to refine his techniques of reanimating dead bugs. The more experience he gained, the more elaborate his films became, within only a few years, producing scores of fully fledged 10 to 15 minute comedies and fantasies, retelling numerous fairy tales and folk fables. Unlike any other at the time, Starovich imbued his puppets with life, drama, emotion, and pure imagination. With movements so realistic, many audience members and critics wondered how he was able to train his bugs so well. 1912's 10-minute The Beautiful Lucanida, in which two male bugs fight for the love of a female bug, is particularly notable as the first puppet film with a proper narrative. It was followed by that year's The Cameraman's Revenge, a comedic statement on love and infidelity, and 1913's The Grasshopper and the Ant, inspired by Aesop's fables. Starovich's films were so popular, they earned him a decoration by the Tsar. By the 1920s, Starovich had fled Russia for Paris, and his stop-motion films had grown extraordinarily extravagant. Films like Frogland or The Frogs Who Wanted a King and The Voice of the Nightingale show the incorporation of various other animals, humanoid puppets, incredible sets and miniature work, beautifully crafted costumes, and a mixture of live-action and stop-motion sequences, exemplifying an incredible control of the motion picture art form and visual storytelling. In 1937, Starovich released his magnum opus, the feature-length The Tale of the Fox, a film which took him an entire decade to make. While he may not have been the first to experiment with the art form, Starovich absolutely refined it and defined its ultimate power, inspiring everything from Willis O'Brien's astonishing effects work in 1933's King Kong, to the masterful creations of Ray Harryhausen, to the fantastical works of Rankin and Bass, to the charming films of Aardman Animation, and even to Wes Anderson's 2009 feature, The Fantastic Mr. Fox. But we're getting a little ahead of ourselves. We'll return to Starovich and these other masterful creatives further down the line. Back in the early 1900s, the rudimentary stop-motion work of Blackton, Chamon, and Melbourne Cooper would inspire French caricaturist and cartoonist Emile Cole, who was applying the principles of stop-motion to the first full-length, traditionally animated cartoons. On the next installment, we explore the life and art of Emile Cole, the father of the animated cartoon, touching on his pioneering works between 1907 and 1910, including the proclaimed first animated cartoon, Phantasmagoria, right here on The Evolution of Cartoons.